Hey there, fourth grade. It's Mr. Remedies, back with our fourth and final reading mini lesson for the week. Wrapping it up strong, wrapping it up with some technical information that you can really put to use as we read more and more in-depth books. Boom. Our lesson today is all about how does an author try to persuade you. We're looking at the techniques and tricks today that authors use in order to get you to believe or do something. So let's scoot on over to our learning goal and success criteria so we know when we're absolutely on target today. Today we are learning to recognize a writer's use of persuasion techniques. Okay. Success criteria today, right over here. I can define persuade. That's important to keep knowing what that is. I can determine what an author is trying to persuade its readers to believe or do, and I can identify at least three persuasion techniques used by authors. If we hit all three of those along the way, I think we'll be pretty successful. So let's quickly review a vocabulary word, and then we'll hit an example with the ground running. Persuade, same as yesterday, to cause someone to do or think something by using reason or facts. And we will see how this definition is going to really come into play later on down the line. Now that we have that out of the way, let's move towards an example. And that example today comes from Follow the Moon Home by Philippe Cousteau. And I have my copy here. I want you to think, as I read a little bit from the letter to a young activist, I want you guys to think about how does the author try to persuade you to make a positive change in the world, because that's what all this book is about. Specifically about turtles, but with this letter to young activist, Mr. Cousteau definitely has a purpose that he's wanting you to change some things for the positive. Right? I'm going to start here on our second paragraph. Look at that. 2 story times with remedies 1 week. Boom. Lucky y'all. My earliest memory of the beach is from a trip my mother took us on to Hawaii. Each day we would go to the beach and explore its tidal pools. We would sit patiently at the edge of those shallow pools of water, not making a sound, and watch as small fish, crabs, sea anemones, and sometimes even an octopus would go about their business. It was a fascinating world to watch and instilled in me with a love of the ocean. These experiences as a young boy inspired me to explore and protect the oceans as my life's work. And then I want to also point out that Mr. Cousteau goes along and he gives us some additional information. So let's listen. 5th paragraph. Listen right here. All you have to do, at the 5th paragraph, he is encouraging the readers and young activists to take some action. So he's trying to get us to do something. Right? And here is what he has to say about that. All you have to do is follow Viv's lead and take 5 simple steps. 5 simple steps. First, explore your community, look around, and identify something you care about. Okay. Skipping down, then develop a plan to fix whatever problem you've identified. Next, take action. That's it. That's the next step. Then think back about what happened because of your work. After you've done that, tell your story. And then he begins to wrap up his letter. So how does the author try to persuade you to make a positive change in the world? Did you guys catch up on some techniques, some ways he went about that? First and foremost, he told us about his own life. And authors will often do that, especially if they've led a life that has a lot of persuasion in it and a lot of activism in it. Right? He provides steps for us to follow. Right? He was clear as day. Follow steps 1 and 2. Really persuading us to make a change and giving us the steps on how to. And finally, he speaks directly to us, especially after he gives us the 5 steps. As he's given us 5 steps, he says, "You identify." When we are writing sentences and we read sentences, if there's not an identified subject, it's an understood you, and that's what he uses. He says, "Step 1, Identify something you care about. All right. Step 2, uh, make a plan. All right. And so there's no subject. So he's talking to you, and he's talking to me, and he's talking to you and me. All right. So we can use our good grammar reading skills to identify that as well. Now, let's move on to another example, shall we? Well, I think we shall. This example comes from Razia's Ray of Hope, and in the back of this book, there is also a note, a plea, a piece of writing that is imploring or directed at people to get involved. And I have recreated that on your screen. So let's give it a little listen. It looks long, but it's not really that long. Don't worry about it. All right. So in Education for Everyone, the author says, you might sometimes wish you didn't have to go to school. But can you imagine if you weren't ever allowed to go to school? If you never learned how to read or write? Around the world, about 69 million school-age children are not in school. That's more than the number of people living in the state of Texas and California combined, and more than double the population of Canada. Almost half of these are children, 31 million, live in sub-Saharan Africa. More than a quarter, 18 million, like Razia, live in Southern Asia. There are many reasons why these children do not go to school, including poverty, political instability, regional conflict, and natural disaster. Many children are also kept out of school because their local traditions forbid it. Instead of learning in school, children often must help to support their families, usually by working in jobs that earn very little money. Razia's story is inspired by the lives of real girls living in the village of Dezbuz, north of Afghanistan's capital city, Kabul. Only about 1/4 of girls living in developing countries go to school at all, and in Afghanistan, only about 13% of women are literate, which means only 13 out of 100 women can read and write. Imagine if your mother couldn't read or write. She wouldn't be able to read you a story, a map, or the directions on a medicine bottle. She wouldn't be able to help you drive a car, or she wouldn't be able to drive a car because she couldn't pass the written test. And there are few well-paying jobs for people who can't read or write. So it is likely your family would not have very much money. By contrast, women who are literate tend to have better incomes, housing, and health care. And in turn, they provide these things for their families and communities. Everyone benefits from educating women. And so now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to ask ourselves the same question as we did with Follow the Moon. How does the author try to persuade you in this piece of text, Education for Everyone? What did they do that that hopefully made you think or believe something or persuaded you to try to do something? Right? Well, the author included tons of facts. They put it in perspective too. Talked about how 31 million women around the world, in certain areas are in certain areas. They provided a lot of statistics and facts, all that math and whatnot, and numbers they were throwing out at us. That is a tried and true persuasion technique. The authors obviously described a problem and a solution. The problem is that there are millions of women around the world who aren't being educated. The solution is get them educated, right? And finally, this was a really good use of persuasive language that inspires us to do something. Words like contrast, putting the statistics in a language that kind of makes us realize how big they are. Texas has a lot of people living in it. California has more people than Texas living in it. And so there are more people than live in those states. There are more women around the world that are not in schools. Or I'm sorry, more children that aren't in schools. No, I want to be accurate. Hey, So that is important. That is important. Um, really choosing words and ways to express their viewpoint and how they want you to think of this particular topic is what we call persuasive language. And hopefully, in this instance, it is inspiring you to do something. So, with those two excellent examples of persuasion techniques out of the way, let's move on to review. Today, we talked a lot about some techniques. We examined some examples and pulled apart some text to see exactly how these techniques fit in there and how the author slices and dices and crafts their writing in order to persuade the reader to do things. So we had talked about authors have many techniques they try to use to persuade their readers, and we talked about the most common ones, like telling about their own life, providing steps for us to follow in order to do the action that they want us to do. They often speak directly to us using like the understood you, and includes important facts and statistics. That's the logic part of a persuasion. I can't argue with math, and I can't argue with science. Right? And they describe a problem and the solution. So here's our problem. Here's the solution. What are you going to do about it? Is a very tried and true technique. And always, I think this one is always a technique they're going to use. They're going to use persuasive language that inspires you to do something. That author is going to pick apart and go to the thesaurus and use really specific, well thought out, and well chosen words to kind of make us feel certain ways and kind of motivate us to do what they are trying to persuade us to do. Like, these are a pretty long laundry list of techniques. I think you guys can name at least 3 of them. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that later on in our activity today. As always, I've been Mr. Remedies. You know who you are. And if you don't, please get some help for that. You guys are fantastic 4th graders, and we will see you down the line.